Alright, look, you already got the flowers. Now it's time to add that personal touch. Making something by hand will always go a long way. Today we're going to make a salted chocolate caramel tart to show that special someone in your life you're thinking about them. Let's dive right into this. Beginning with the crust, take 1 1/3 cup all-purpose flour, 3 tablespoons of unsweetened cocoa powder, and 1/4 cup of granulated sugar with a pinch of salt, and throw it in a food processor for just a few seconds until combined. If you don't have a food processor, that's fine. You can do this by hand using a pastry cutter, although it'll probably take you a little longer than just a few seconds. Next, add 1 1/3 stick of butter cut into small cubes, like so, and pulse until the mixture becomes crumbly and resembles small pebbles. This will take about 10 pulses or so. Next, add a half teaspoon of vanilla extract and 1 large egg, and keep pulsing until the dough is no longer dry and starts to clump together, about 10 or 15 seconds. Do not process to the point that a large ball of dough is formed and starts rolling around. If you have one large mass banging around in there, you've gone too far and you will need to start over. Sorry. When your dough looks just about right, throw the dough onto a lightly floured surface and form into a ball. It should come together rather quick without being too sticky. But if it is too sticky, add a little bit of flour little by little. Flatten the ball slightly with your hands to form a thick disc. I like to hit it on each side against my counter to help form it into shape. You can either go with 4 sides to give you a rectangle, or then hit each 4 of those corners to give you a circle. This is just a quick little cheat. Then wrap it with plastic wrap and refrigerate it for at least 1 hour. If you don't want to use the dough right away, you can refrigerate this up to 3 days or even freeze it for a month and then let it thaw out overnight in the fridge. When you're ready to work, take the dough out of the fridge and let it sit on the counter for a few minutes to soften slightly for easier rolling. On a lightly floured surface, roll the dough into a 12-inch circle. I like to flatten with a rolling pin like this to get things warmed up a bit before physically rolling out my dough. Be sure to rotate the dough as you're rolling. This way you only need to roll in one direction and keep a more uniform shape as you're rolling. Just a pro tip. For thickness, I would shoot for 1/4 of an inch thick, although don't go crazy here, it's going to rise a bit in the oven regardless. Then place gently into a 9-inch tart pan, preferably one with a removable bottom, just like this. The dough is delicate because of the butter, so please don't worry if it starts to crack. I'll show you how to fix this in just a minute. Carefully push the dough into the seam of the pan, that's where the sides meet the bottom, and guide it with your other hand. By gently picking the dough up and then almost dropping it into place, you'll carefully be able to get this dough into shape. Now, this dough warms up rather quick due to its butter content, so try to work quickly before it gets too soft. Using your rolling pin, gently roll the top of the pan to trim away any excess. The pressure will push a little too much dough back into the pan, so again, use your fingers to even them up the sides. If you have any cracks or holes, roll some dough between your fingers to warm it up, and like clay, smear it right over your cracks to patch them. This will then be filled with chocolate ganache, so no one will actually be able to see those little cracks and mistakes from the outside. We're going to pop this in the freezer just until firm, about 30 minutes or so. Frozen dough is less prone to shrinking while baking. Then, with a sharp knife, trim the edges of the pastry to fit the tart pan. Again, this is easier with a sharp knife and when your dough is well chilled. Now we're going to blind bake this. Well, what is blind baking? Blind baking refers to baking the crust with aluminum foil and pie weight so that it won't puff up and will ensure an even bake. If we didn't do this, even if we were to poke holes or dock our crust, it would puff up in inconsistent areas. I'm using dried beans here that have been promoted to full-time baking beans. Good job, guys. Then place in a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven in the middle rack. Bake for about 25 minutes or until the foil no longer sticks to the dough. Transfer the crust to a wired rack and remove the weights and foil and allow the shell to cool. In a large saucepan, bring 2 cups granulated sugar, a 1/2 cup of water, and 1/4 cup of corn syrup to a boil. Stir or swirl the pan occasionally to ensure no sugar is crystallizing or hardening around the outside. We want this to melt as evenly as possible. Cook the mix until it's a medium amber color. Here we are around the halfway mark. You can see the bubbles are forming rapidly as they collapse. This is because there's still a fair amount of water. In comparison to this, where we have a much slower boil because of the absence of moisture, and the sugar is starting to amber on its own. Now remove from heat. Keep in mind, caramel will continue to cook and darken off of the heat, so Be sure to pull this early enough. It's really only something that comes from experience. Carefully but quickly whisk in 1 stick of unsalted butter, a half a cup of heavy cream, and 2 tablespoons of creme fraiche with a pinch of salt. Whisk until smooth, but be careful as the mixture will bubble due to the cold fats we are adding. This is the basics of how you make a pliable, chewy caramel. I'll show you other variations and how to get a specific consistency that you desire in other videos. By the way, I know this is a salted caramel tart recipe, but I always use unsalted butter whenever using butter, as I prefer to be able to control the salt taste. Now pour hot caramel into that tart and allow to cool and set at room temperature for at least 1 hour. I like to gently tap out my tart to eliminate any air bubbles that may have formed from our pouring process. Now for the ganache, place 3½ ounces of dark chocolate in a heat-proof bowl. I used a 72% dark chocolate here. Rough chop your chocolate as it will help with melting evenly. Then in a small saucepan, bring a half a cup of heavy cream to a boil. Once it's boiling, pour the hot cream over the chocolate and let it sit still for about 60 seconds. This is a pro tip I've learned through the years. Allowing the heat to start melting the chocolate will reduce the stirring time, as stirring will only incorporate more air and cool your chocolate quicker, thus tempering it too soon. When the chocolate has just started to melt on its own, you can then start slowly stirring your chocolate. When the chocolate is completely melted, meaning free of any lumps and completely smooth, you can pour the ganache over the tart. Tilt the tart for even coverage rather than using a spatula so you have a nice, clean, smooth surface on top. Use that nifty tapping technique again to eliminate any air bubbles, then refrigerate until the tart is set, at least 1 hour. Unfortunately, what you don't see here is after about 20 minutes of fridge time, I took it out and sprinkled with a little bit of fleur-de-sel salt, which is a coarse flaky salt, but you can really use any brand you'd like. Then return it back to the fridge to set. Let this sit at room temp for a few minutes before slicing for easier and cleaner cuts. Look at those perfect little layers. Great job, dude. Nailed it. Now this recipe could easily be subbed out for a milk chocolate, or perhaps double your ganache amount if you would like to omit the caramel. Or omit the chocolate and double the caramel if that's your sort of thing. Either way you make it, they're going to really love it. Here's to celebrating love and, of course, all things chocolate. Till next time.